After what we've seen over the past few months, I think we finally need to admit, once and for all, that these people are fucking idiots.
I screwed up. I was CEO. I had a responsibility. That means that I was responsible ultimately.
We did not catch and fix these issues faster.
Are you sincerely trying to save the world?
Well, I'm trying to do good things, yeah.
Definitely not worried about getting sued, but I'm worried about doing something for my own benefit.
Well, I've read one, but I know you can't talk about it.
I don't know which Nazi.
I regret for every single person that had to go through that. It was not my intention, not what they signed up for.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
The FTX bankruptcy has shed light on a lot of bad business and investing practices, both within the company and outside of it. One of the biggest issues that now seems funny in hindsight was the undue attention placed on the business's founder and CEO Sam Bankman-Fried, or SBF as he is better known amongst recently bankrupt crypto bros. In the lead up to its eventual collapse, SBF arguably got more attention than the multi-billion-dollar business he ran. Unsophisticated financial commentators, all the way up to the world's largest venture capital firms, were captivated by the fact that he wore the same sneakers as their grandparents and drove a Toyota Corolla. As the FTX story unfolds, allegations are now coming into light that this geeky persona was little more than a carefully curated image, and that Bankman-Fried would go as far as to intentionally act erratic with outside investors because it furthered his image as some kind of misunderstood visionary genius. But what was, for some reason, a big selling point for SBF and his doomed companies should really be a cautionary tale for all of us. Visionaries do not make good CEOs, and to take it a step further, good CEOs should not be visionaries. It's easy to throw stones at the rubble of a bankrupt company like FTX, but celebrity CEOs have become a genuine problem that might be costing us all a lot of money, even if we don't directly invest into their companies. So it's time to learn how money works to find out why knowing who the CEO of a company is could really be a bad sign. When we are talking about visionary CEOs whose personal image is inseparably linked with their companies, it's hard to look much further than Elon Musk. Musk is obviously a talented guy, and his mere mention of a company or a cryptocurrency can send valuations skyrocketing. But that's not a power you want your CEO to have. Investors in Musk's ventures have mostly done well for themselves up until this point, but that trend is starting to reverse. Tesla's stock price is down over 50% from its peak, which means a lot of investors in the company are now holding onto positions where they have lost money. His drawn-out acquisition of Twitter has not been going well, to say the least. By almost every educated estimate, he significantly overpaid for the platform, because the alternative was going to prison for stock manipulation. Musk used his significant stake in Tesla as collateral for the loans he needed to take out to close the $44 billion deal, which has now put downward pressure on the electric car company that had no direct involvement in Twitter outside of sharing the same visionary CEO. People find it much easier to get behind the idea of a charismatic person than they do to get behind the ideas of a big corporation, and this can be great for building hype around a company. But then for better or worse, that company becomes linked to that person's decisions. Individuals who have only been told how smart they are for decades on end are prone to making more erratic decisions than boring structured corporate management. The problem for investors is that by the time a CEO like Musk has crafted themselves a public image as a visionary, the stocks they represent are already overvalued, and any dumb decisions they make going forward will represent outsized downside risk to that position. If a business sells itself on having a visionary CEO, any investor in that business is putting their money behind a person as much as they are a business, and people are much less predictable than well-regulated companies. Musk's ongoing Twitter saga and some bad PR moves in the past have hurt investors in his companies, but he is a saint compared to a lot of other touted visionary CEOs. Outright fraudulent companies like FTX, Theranos, and companies really cutting close to the line like WeWork would not have been possible without charismatic figureheads distracting investors from the fact that their business makes no sense. Startup founders do need to occasionally be their own hype man to attract early investors and customers, but there is a big difference between talking about what a business can bring to a market and talking about a personal vision for changing the world. Even if businesses do not start off with fraudulent intentions, admitting failure early on is going to be much easier for a manager to do if they have not aligned their personal identity with the success of their business. There is no way of knowing for sure, but Elizabeth Holmes probably didn't set out to start a vehicle for investment fraud. She started out to build a medical technology company. When her technology didn't work, the right thing to do would have been to admit the failing and either shut down the company or try to raise more money to continue research and development. But failures and setbacks are not what you would expect of a visionary CEO like Holmes, so she took a different route that destroyed billions of dollars and landed her in prison for 11 years.
Sentencing Elizabeth Holmes of Theranos to more than a decade in prison. Remember, of course, Holmes was convicted about some business dealings related to this failed blood testing startup.
An exciting company with boring management is going to do much better long-term than a boring company with managers that are celebrities in their own right. The explosion in the number of visionary CEOs in the past 20 years is no accident. Today, CEOs of large companies will personally hire public relations consultants to polish their personal image in the media. Corporate ladder climbing CEOs try not to attract too much attention. They mostly want to make sure that a cursory Googling of their name won't say anything that could affect their chances of landing another 8-figure role. But company founders will often take this a step further. People like Holmes, Newman, Bankman-Fried, and Musk work carefully to curate an image of themselves as a genius who was simply destined for success. A fine-tuning of their public image goes beyond framing them as misunderstood geniuses as well. Bezos, Holmes, Zuckerberg, Newman, Buffett, the Waltons, and most recently, of course, SBF himself have all had articles written about the cheap cars they use to drive. PR consultants will grant access to media outlets that are willing to report on these cars because it furthers their image as a frugal, pragmatic business owner who is more interested in changing the world than they are in surrounding themselves with luxury. These same articles conveniently exclude details like the fact that Bezos has 2 private jets, a dozen homes around the country, and a very expensive toy rocket hobby, and Zuckerberg owns an entire Hawaiian island. Buffett, the king of the humble persona, also owns a private jet and mostly gets driven around in a fleet of Suburbans, and Bankman-Fried may have very well driven a Corolla, but he also used hundreds of millions of dollars worth of investors' money to buy up luxury real estate all over the Bahamas for the enjoyment of himself and his fellow FTX executives. The problem this creates for businesses is that it becomes very hard to pivot away from the ideas that aren't working because it can hurt the personal brand of the visionary CEO. Whereas if the company was being led by a generic corporate suit, it is far less damaging for them to change course or simply be replaced. The biggest problem today with so-called visionary CEOs is that they normally hurt the everyday functions of the business and can ironically actually reduce how innovative the company is.
You talking to me?
A report by the Harvard Business Review titled Why Visionary Leadership Fails looked at 136 managers across various levels of the corporate hierarchy. They found that managers that could be identified as visionaries often micromanaged their staff, were prone to being overly fixated on irrelevant details, and quashed the free flow of ideas amongst their peers and subordinates. Visionary leadership was also found to create a culture of despondency in the workplace amongst workers who weren't fully aligned with their visionary CEO's vision. If workers can't contribute their own ideas towards a project, they are unlikely to put in any more effort than the bare minimum to qualify for a promotion or to simply avoid termination. Visionary managers were also shown to create this culture for all levels of management underneath them. If a middle manager has a personal vision for how something should be done and won't accept anything different, then the managers beneath them won't be engaged, and neither will the managers beneath them, and so on down to the bottom of the corporate ladder. If that visionary leader happens to have the very top job, then it can create this culture for the entire company. A lot of companies run by visionary leaders have been famously terrible places to work. Tesla and SpaceX have very high staff turnover rates compared to their industry average. Emerging stories from inside FTX are not painting a good picture, and even Apple during its era of Steve Jobs was a famously unpleasant place to work.
My camera's not turning on. What's that? I did slide it and let go. It's not turning on. Here. Okay. We'll let an expert see if he can turn it on.
A CEO's job is to decide on strategic directions for a company and put the right process in place to make sure the company stays on track to achieve those results. It sounds like an easy job, but it is hard and time-consuming, and frankly, quite boring. It's much more fun to roleplay Tony Stark and get directly involved in the development of whatever is going to make the next week's headlines. Companies grow by attracting and utilizing talent. Even if a visionary CEO is legitimately brilliant, they are never going to be as creative or solve big problems as effectively as a good team of qualified and motivated staff. But if visionaries really do make terrible corporate leaders, then why are there so many of them? Well, the Harvard Business Review presents a compelling answer to this question too, which is that most people that see themselves and want themselves to be seen as visionaries are more likely to start companies and have the right personality to seek early-stage capital. Pure sample bias means if more people in this group of people try to start a business, more of them will be successful enough to become household names, even if they have a lower starting chance of becoming successful, as compared to a founder who just wants to build a solid business in an area where they see a good opportunity. Now, the final mistake of visionary CEOs is that since their personal reputation relies so heavily on the success of their company, they find it impossible to scale back operations, even if it is in the best interest of their stakeholders. Go and watch my video on why good companies should never last forever, where I discuss this mistake in detail. A special thanks again to Helix for making it possible for everybody to keep on learning how money works.
Don't fire me. Please. Give me one good reason why I shouldn't fire you right here on the spot. I have excellent sales numbers! Not good enough! I'll do anything! Anything